Hello and welcome to Community Topics number 33 of Dualistic Unity. I am here now and never what I think. No matter what sort of label that society wants to place upon me, no matter how much it wants to say that I am definitely this because of this, as much as I don't know anything, neither does society. A lot of times people like to settle upon certain things while keeping the assumption that no one knows what they're talking about. It's like, yeah, but you're still settling upon quite a few things, quite a few labels, quite a few assumptions about what's happening here, what you're doing, what you are. And so I like to, as often as I can, go back to the recognition of that raw uncertainty, being willing to step into whatever situation that reality takes me into without needing to cling to so many labels.
And I feel like I've been here forever. It's interesting to me because in our groups, in our conversations, even, I have the unique perspective, not unique among humanity. I'm sure there are other people who have been through this in the same way, but the unique perspective of having woken up to this over half my life ago. And so I've been wandering around in this state of recognition regarding the complete lack of time or space or division or difference or ego. And I've been letting that recognition unfold for a long time. But I've sat here in eternity, aware that I'm in eternity as one. And over those 20 years, it's so interesting to me because my perception of people has changed in the way that I just keep seeing them pop up everywhere. And I see them as other reflections of me, kind of like mycelium will spawn different mushrooms, and some mushrooms will last longer than others, and some mushrooms will pop up and they're new, and other ones are older, and so on and so forth. I very much see people like that, except they're all me. They're all the same mycelium expressing itself. And so it's been really entertaining to go through life seeing people or mushrooms of various age and size at different stages of recognition that they are the mycelium. And that's how the world appears to me. And so, about 6 years into it, when I found out I was going to be a father, my perspective of being a parent was informed by that recognition that I had been living with for the last 6 years. And so, parenting for me became a very different prospect than it is for most people who view themselves as humans separate from the world and everything else. And so that leads us to today's community topic, which is parenting. I know this one has been voted on a lot. I know there has been numerous attempts to bring this to our attention. I'm glad that it took as long as it did because, frankly, I have learned even more about parenting throughout the growth of Dualistic Unity. I've learned more about myself, and I think that's very much the point that I want to start with. There is no such thing as a good parent, in the same way that there is no such thing as a good human. But there are levels of awareness and there are levels of sensitivity. And that is very much what makes a good parent.
Yeah, this is going to be a fun one, and I am definitely going to rely upon you from the parenting side of things, though I'm not going to discount the experience that I've had with parents as a child, as a human being, as reality experiencing itself. And because as Ray alluded to, there's a lot more parenting than just the label of being a parent. It's not too dissimilar, though we'll get into how it is dissimilar from relationships in general and how you perceive yourself, where you feel like you derive your value from, the labels that you cling to, and what you think that means about you, and what you think the label means, and how you try and live up to certain labels because society is telling you that this is what the label means, and all of those things we're definitely going to get into. But it's been interesting in my experience, especially in the last year and a half throughout Dualistic Unity, my perspective of my parents, how that's shifted. And I'm 27 now, so my relationship with my parents is a lot different than it was when I was 17. It's a lot different than when I was 7. Every time it's like a much different shift. Whereas now it's not so much that I look to them for advice or a sense of, taking care of me. Like I'm on my own, do all my own shit, have my own life, have my own aspirations and whatnot. And so even with that recognition of seeing myself in everyone, letting go of the story of me, I think your parents are one of the toughest things to see as you. I think they are probably where I have the toughest time seeing myself in them because there's just such a history my entire life of seeing them in a very specific way. Whereas even with my brother and sister, I see them in closer to the same vein as myself, in terms of age, interests, conversations, growing up and all of those things. And so there's more similarities and less labels. I think there's a lot less weight that comes with the label of sibling or brother or sister than parent. And so I'm going to be I'm curious to find out where we take this conversation and what we kind of explore, but I found it to be an interesting process of letting go of my perception of my parents as parents and seeing them as another iteration of myself and sort of the conversations that have come from getting closer to that recognition and being willing to step into certain conversations with them that because they've seen me in a certain way throughout my entire life that has shifted quite a bit over the past couple of years, being willing to kind of go into conversations and express things differently than maybe they would expect me to express them as has been, I don't know, a very interesting experience. But I did want to get that across because I think a lot of people, especially, around my age in their 20s, who have sort of woken up to recognize that they're not what they think they are, there can be a lot of difficulty in expressing that to your parents. Not that you have to express that to them, but just interacting with people who have very strong ideas of you and who you have always had very strong ideas of after you recognize that the idea of anyone that you hold on to isn't the reality of them. And so there's definitely a unraveling process, but I think it's a much slower process when interacting with your parents.
I'd say so because there's a lot of resistance to it to some degree. Because in order to understand your parents, you would have to almost devalue all of the struggles you've been through up until this point. And I don't necessarily mean devalue, but to put in context. And this is something that children of all ages hate in general: how much their parents have already done and seen and learned. It's uncomfortable because it makes us feel like we're less when we're children. It's not that we are, it's just that the reality is that this part of you or this reflection of you has been here longer, and they've gone through things that you can't possibly understand, right? Including raising you. And in the process of raising you, went through lessons, became different people, did a bunch of things that in order for you to understand, you would have to get yourself almost entirely out of the way in terms of the narrative. You would actually have to just look at them as people, put yourself in their shoes and go, right. And if I had a kid at that age and I was living here, and just go through the story and start thinking to yourself, like, wow, there's a lot to this story. And you start to recognize that that's you in another life. It's the same thing with looking back at history, right? The more you learn about a historical figure, the more you can start to see yourself in their shoes, the more you can start to see their life, and the more gray area there is. Like, we so often have a very superficial image of someone because it's comfortable to do so, but then you learn more about them. It's like that expression, don't meet your heroes, that kind of thing. So with parents, especially, there is this requirement as you grow up that you have an idea of who your parents are and what that means, because you need to look to them for safety, for security, for love and attention and guidance. And so you have this idea of the parent that's introduced to you that is separate from you. And there is this gap in terms of your experience and their experience. And the problem is that a lot of parents don't go out of their way to diffuse that. I've mentioned before, I think my daughter was like 7, and she had started to get a little edgy around me, and you could tell that she wasn't necessarily expressing everything that she was going through with her friends and stuff like that. And so we sat down and we had a talk, and I told her, I feel like you're looking at me as just dad, as the idea of dad. And I need you to recognize that's not what this is. I'm just like you. I've just been here longer. I've just gone through some of the stuff that you're going through before. I don't know any better than anyone else. Like, I'm just doing my best in the same way you would if you were me. And so we had this conversation, and she's looking at me in the face, and you could see it suddenly dawns on her. And so she starts crying. She's like, I have been looking at you as someone else, as someone who isn't like me. And so we connected. And so we've had moments like that ever since. But how often do parents sit down and question the concept that they derive their authority from? More importantly, in front of their children. And it's important to do that. But if you don't have that awareness, if you're still self-defining, if you're still trying to look for a sense of value and control and certainty and so on and so forth, you are never going to question that idea of being the parent. And so your kid is going to grow up with that idea not being questionable. It's going to become harder and harder for them to relate to you, which is why parents and children tend to drift apart, especially when you introduce the schooling system and you start taking them apart for longer and longer periods of time. There's this division that kind of grows just because of our participation in this environment. If we don't constantly keep in mind that that is happening, if we're not applying our awareness. And so I had Chat GPT make me a list of some of the common questions that most parents ask, because my daughter is turning 16 very soon. So I've gone through a lot of these phases, and I don't necessarily remember all the questions that I asked along the way, but I do remember the solutions. And so I just wanted to bring some of these up. How do I discipline my child effectively? What should I do when my child throws a tantrum? How much sleep does my child need? How do I teach them good manners? What age should they start school? How do I potty train my child? What should I do if my child is being bullied? What kind of activities are best? How do I talk to my child about difficult topics like sex or drugs? So you'll notice that all of these questions are very similar to the questions that you and I get frequently. But what do I do next? And it's because it's coming from a mentality that is looking for a how-to instruction sheet. And that, unfortunately, is because most people get into parenting without any awareness of who they are. We've talked about this. A lot of the time, children are brought into the world as a result of two people exercising need without awareness. And so that child is now born and has to grow up in this world. And they're not being raised by people who are aware of what they are in terms of them being the same thing. And so they're devalued. They're kind of ignored. They're just straight up not recognized. And it's because self-absorbed people cannot recognize other versions of themselves. We talk about this all the time. And so in all of these questions, the answer always comes back to the same thing: awareness. 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 Pay attention. Be sensitive. Be empathetic. Spend the time and the attention with your child to feel out what's happening. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't go look for resources. I want to make that very clear. Go look for resources. Go and look for parenting groups. Go look for books. Look for videos online. Talk to your doctor. Talk to a health professional if you have any questions about nutrition, health, anything like that. Don't be afraid to ask. What I'm saying, though, is that you can't always ask, and the answers you get won't always be the right answers because they're not yours. They're not the answers that have come up through the relationship you have with your child. As my daughter has grown up, there have been numerous times where my brain said, do this. This is what a parent does. This is how a parent is supposed to be looked at. This is how your child is supposed to learn about the parent-child relationship. And my heart stepped in and went, right, that doesn't need to happen that way. And by heart, I mean my empathy. I recognized myself, and immediately that parent child relationship changed to me just interacting with another version of myself. And in those moments, my daughter had a breakthrough, or she had an insight, or we managed to connect on a deeper level. But it was always, always as a result of seeing her for what she was, not being a parent.
I think that ability to see your child for what they are and let go of your idea of what you think should be and needs to be and is the right thing and kind of settling upon that certainty is where not even the answer is found, but the process of conversing about it happens. And I think as you were talking, it reminded me a little bit of our conversation with Ariel a couple episodes ago, and one-on-ones, and finding that balance between not saying that this is the right thing to do, this is the thing you have to do, but also not saying I have no fucking idea what to do. Oh, you're getting bullied? I don't know how to deal with that. I don't know. And just like kind of leaving them, because both sides are settling upon a sort of certainty, like this is the answer, you have to do this, this is the only way, versus yeah, I got nothing, sorry, and just kind of avoid the responsibility of that relationship. And it's very similar, and that's kind of, we were talking about it in a one-on-one context and interacting with other adults, but I think it's very similar to the parent-child relationship in that you find that balance in between, not settling upon this is what you have to do, but here are some things that may help. Let's talk about it instead of just saying like, I don't feel like dealing with you. Just do this and be gone. And it's not so much the answer that you come to, but it's the process of conversing about it and being open about it and letting them know that you don't know exactly what to do all of the time, because they probably have an idea. And I'm speaking from more of a relationship perspective than a parent, not a parent. But people can settle upon this assumption and coming at it from the perspective of a child that, you need to know what to do. And so you look to your parents, and when your parents tell you this is what you need to do, or I have no idea what to do, it kind of like throws you into this like extreme amount of uncertainty. And when they tell you what to do, it kind of puts you in this spot where like, I didn't know what to do, but they know what to do. I should know what to do, and I don't. Instead of kind of easing that fear of not knowing what to do by recognizing, oh, no one knows what they do. I think that's a very common thing for children to start to recognize in their later teenage years, early 20s, because growing up, you think that everyone knows what they're doing. You think everyone has things figured out. And if your parents kind of play that part and think being a good parent is having everything figured out all the time and playing this sort of character that always knows what's best, they never let their guard down, they never show weakness, they never show insecurity. Your children grow up thinking that's the best way to be. And so when they don't feel those things, they're like, well, shit, everyone, I should have things figured out and I don't. And then it's very frightening. It's very unnerving to think that. And then it inevitably, as you start to interact with more and more adults, interact with more and more people who are like, yeah, I mean, I didn't know what I was doing at your age. I had no idea what I was doing. And then I just started doing some stuff. And then I don't know, I'm here. Like I never actually knew what I was doing. And so finding that balance of openness, but also the willingness to sit down and talk about it, I think is very important. Like you can sort of avoid the conversation on two sides saying this is it, go away, or I don't know, go away. But there's a middle ground where it's like, I'm not totally sure. Here are some things that help. Let's talk about it. Let's have a conversation. It's the conversation itself that sort of builds that connection and fosters that connection. But we get so caught up in thinking like, I have to be a good thing, be it a parent, be it a friend, be it a partner, be it whatever you want to plug into that. And so you have an idea of what being a good one is, as opposed to dropping that and just being a human being with the person and having a conversation about it, seeing where it goes, and kind of creating a sense of comfort and helping them to let go of their own labels that they've clung to, not the least of which being their label of you as being a parent, an adult, has everything figured out, knows exactly what they're doing all the time, always knows what to do, what to say, where to go with things. When you let them know that they don't, there's like a massive weight that gets dropped off. Every kid that recognizes that, oh my God, I don't have to have everything figured out by the time I'm 18 years old. Oh wow. That's very freeing. I can just go about things and find out and learn and discover and explore, et cetera. And so I think being an example of that, of someone who's still doing that, no matter how old you are, is one of the best things you could ever do for your children.
I'm really glad that you brought up relationships, because there really isn't a difference in terms of your relationships with other people or your relationship with your child. The only significant difference is that the relationships you have with other people tend to be within the spectrum of development that you are currently at, or at least close to that spectrum of development, because you're dealing with other adults. But when you're dealing with children, you're dealing with earlier steps of development, fundamental steps of development. So there's a lot of insights that you've had. There's a lot of things that you've learned the hard way that you take for granted, that you don't necessarily see that they have to go through. And so that's another part of parenting, is the long-term view of your own existence, recognizing exactly how much it took to get you to where you are now, appreciating how many lessons you've went through and how many times you had to do it the hard way. Because a lot of times parents will be frustrated with children because they're not developing fast enough, right? Or because they're still rude. It's like, right, so are you. At one point, you went through all of these stages. Doesn't matter what age it was at, because there's different developmental things that are happening all the time. And so people are not just this variable linear projection in terms of you start at birth and by 20 you are this kind of person. There's all kinds of variance in between. There's all kinds of different ways that we can develop by 20 years old, right? And so it's really important to recognize that there's a lot of stages. And if you're impatient, that's on you. If you don't recognize what they're going through at the time, do some self-reflection, because there's a good chance it's a part of your own childhood that maybe you're not willing to look at or process. And there's some lessons to learn there. This is one of the things I've really enjoyed about being a parent ever since my daughter was born. I've had numerous insights about my own life that I don't know if I would have necessarily learned if not for that experience. Likewise, patience, understanding the developmental process has informed so much of the way I talk to people, the way I coach, the way I create content, or anything else, right? It's all just the expansion of your context and your awareness if you treat it that way. But that all said, I want to mention very quickly that I'm aware I'm very lucky in that I woke up to all this before I had my daughter. And so, as much as I've still fucked up significantly here and there as a parent, because of course you can't avoid it, there has been less distortion, because frankly, there's been less need on my part to get in the way. That is not always the case. Sometimes we've had 3 or 4 children out of toxic relationships, which were based on need or based on decisions that were caused by distortion, things like that. We weren't necessarily at the same level of awareness we are now by the time we wake up and realize, oh, right, shit, I'm making ripples in my life and I've already made all these ripples. So at that point, particularly when you're just coming to that point of awareness and you recognize that a lot of the behavior of your children is a result of the lack of awareness that you have had around them up until this point. And so they're acting out, they're doing more extreme things. Maybe they're in their teens and they're starting to play with alcohol or drugs, things like that. So at that point, you're like, well, do I just sit down and explain I don't know what I'm doing? Probably not. And the reason is because there's a lot of steps in between. There's a lot of steps that came before that were distorted just by your lack of presence and awareness in them. And so now it's even more important to exercise all of the lessons that we're talking about. And again, those lessons are very much just based on awareness, consideration, sensitivity, humility, commitment, sacrifice. getting yourself out of the way so you can be there for your child. That doesn't mean do this or do this or do that. It just means that you are closer to them in terms of proximity to their reality instead of in your head trying to figure out who they are. You're allowing yourself to serve. Now, that doesn't mean you're a pushover because you are still emulating reality. What I mean here is that sometimes there is no choice but to put up a wall and say, look, a normal human being sets a boundary when they're treated like this. And that is a lesson. Is your child going to enjoy that? No, in the same way that you didn't enjoy it. And this comes to the other point I want to make before I pass it back to Andrew. To all of you parents out there, do remember, we start with liquid soup in our skull. Over time, that soup hardens up, starts to take shape, starts to actually learn things. And by the time we're like 25 years old, it becomes almost capable of rational thought. Keep that in mind. They're going through stages. In your teenage life, your amygdala develops faster than the rest of your brain. Your amygdala is tied to your fear response. So, of course, everything in your teenage life seems like the end of the world. Everything's a big deal when you're a teenager, right? Remember that. You may not remember it now because you've had time to develop. You've had time to develop some context and a thicker skin, but our children have not. And so while it is important for us to understand that, it is also important for us to help them develop that thicker skin. But it all comes down to awareness and empathy. And if you can just have faith in yourself and put them first, you will find a way.
I think something that makes that significantly easier is recognizing in yourself that your value doesn't fluctuate. Your kids don't determine your value. They are not a indicator of how valuable you are, how good they are at sports, how good they are in the school play, how great their art is in fucking art class when they're 6 years old, how, what college they go to, what elementary school they go to. Kids are like trying to apply for elementary school. Like I have cousins especially in like London, England area. Like their school system is whack as fuck. Like they're doing standardized tests at the age of like 8 years old to get into a middle school, which helps them get into a better high school, which helps them get into a better college. And it's like, I thought the US was bad with all the school stuff. Like they are so much like way worse. The stress, the amount of stress that my 10-year-old cousin was going through was absurd. And so recognizing in yourself that your value doesn't fluctuate can help a lot in terms of that relationship with your child. Because if you're still trying to derive some value from them, it's going to be way harder to find any connection with them because you're seeing them as a means to an end. You're seeing them as a way for you to gain value. And so I think even after you become a parent, it's important to continue to let go of your perceptions of yourself rather than continuing to hold on to those things and then adding, oh, I got a kid now or a couple kids. Here's another way for me to derive value from them. And so, again, not coming at it from a parent's perspective, but am coming at it from an appreciation of my own parents and growing up as a kid. And they did not derive their value from their children at all. And it's one of the things that I am most appreciative of because I know what a lot of my friends went through in terms of pressure from their parents to go to a certain school, to play a certain sport, to play the sports that their parents wanted them to go to the school that their parents wanted them to go to. And I was like, I couldn't even fathom having to go through that, but it's super common. So I'm very aware of how lucky I am. And it's funny to say that like I'm the lucky one who doesn't have to go through parents trying to derive value from their children. But that's the case because so many people, we do it as a society. So of course, you're a parent. Most of them are going to do it and see their kids in that way. And I think just having a lot of kids is a way that people derive their value. got a strong seed because I had 7 kids. It's like, oh fucking hey, dude. Come on now. But anyway, so I think it's important as a parent to not let go of your own process to continue to maintain that ability to question what you think you are and almost prioritize that along with prioritizing your child's development, is not to let go of your own development just because you became a parent, because then that can trend in a downwards trajectory where you're no longer questioning yourself, and so you're kind of holding on to your false certainties and then instilling that into your children that it's good to have false certainties, whereas you maintain a state of questioning. You're going to instill in them it's okay to question, it's okay to not be sure, it's okay to say I don't know, and all of those things. So the main point I wanted to get across was just letting go of the idea that your value fluctuates will help you to let go of the idea that your kids add or take away any value from you, and the sort of serious responsibility that should be taken from being a parent. And it goes beyond just like, doing the stuff that makes kids, but like it's okay to go through adoption and whatnot too on both ends. Like if you're not ready for a kid and you have one, like there are people who are willing to adopt if you can't have a kid and want one, and like it's awesome to adopt. Like there's lots of kids out there who could utilize that as well. But yeah, having kids does not in any way, shape, or form raise your value. Having a certain amount of kids doesn't raise your value. Your kid's doing well at something or not doing as well at something based on your perception of doing well does not raise or lower your value. And if you can maintain that, I think that process of being a parent is going to be just a whole lot easier.
I just wanted to say that in a lot of ways, you are very, very lucky. And the reason I say that is because, and I know from my life and the lives of many other people that I've known over the years, some children are born into households where the parents are so unaware of their own identity and their need to self-validate that they are having the children enable their addictions, that they are not paying attention to those children as there is obvious consequences to their lack of awareness. There's a lot of horror stories out there. And I'm just very grateful that your parents are as awesome as they are, because I think we can all admit that Andrew is a stand-up fucking guy for sure. That all said, I wanted to say that, and I think your parents can resonate with this as well, Andrew, commitment. Commitment, I think, is the biggest thing. And that commitment can't be to being a good parent. It has to be to you. And what I mean is that if you can see yourself in your child, if you can put yourself back when you were born, when you were small and the world was huge, when you were cold and you were afraid and you didn't know how to defend yourself or feed yourself or even how to communicate your needs, that's a very vulnerable and frightening place to be. And in that place, the only thing you wanted was someone to be there for you without asking anything from you. If you're a parent, this is your opportunity to do that for yourself. This is your opportunity to do that for another version of yourself that is coming from that place. There is nothing more important, in the same way there was nothing more important to you. Take that in. It's just the commitment to this being. That's all it is. They come first because you have done well enough to at least get to the point where you can bring them into the world. Now, I want to say, even if you are coming to this later, even if you are awash of consequence where your kids aren't talking to you or they're acting out or they're doing all that, commitment. It's just commitment to it. Okay. Because at least in that commitment, you are willing to put them first. You are willing to show them something other than what you've been showing them. And you're willing to take advantage of each and every hard, challenging moment as an opportunity to grow. And what I mean is specifically that your kids are occasionally going to tell you off. They're occasionally going to judge you. They're occasionally going to vilify you. In that is a lesson. In that is an opportunity for you to question yourself and the idea of yourself and the fact that maybe that still hurts at all. And there you have an opportunity to grow that you wouldn't necessarily if it wasn't for your kids and how well they know you and your previous buttons. So there are opportunities. But that said, it's a gauntlet. At that point, you have to go through a shit ton to come out the other side just because it's been put off for so long. But it can be done as long as you're just committed to them and you, because it's the same thing. But that awareness has to be there. You can't be doing it to be a good parent because immediately you have an idea of what a good parent is, and that separates you from your child.
Yeah, I think seeing being a parent as an opportunity is one of the best perspectives you can maintain. An opportunity, similarly to the way that every interaction you ever have is an opportunity to shift reality. Having a child is a way to do that like tenfold, almost because children are such sponges by, before the age of 10, still kind of sponges before the age of 20. There's so much that they're influenced by, and you have a massive impact on that influence that I think a lot of people see as scary, but seeing it as scary is almost a good indicator that your intentions are in a decent spot. If you see it as a burden, if you see it as a pain in the ass, if you see it as just my kids, then it's not a great indication that you're going about it in a way that has the sensitivity to understand the gravity of being a parent, the impact. Like you are molding a kind of raw, just clump of clay in a way, and finding the balance between molding it and also letting it mold itself is very key. So this kind of brings me to a question for Ray, because I know you've talked about this in the past. I think you've probably brought it up in the podcast before, but your process of finding that balance between being God and recognizing yourself in your daughter versus being a reflection of the society that she's being born into. Like I can imagine for a parent who has recognized things a little bit more deeply and they're wondering, I want to help my kid in so many different ways. I want to help them to see that, they're not what they think. They don't have to cling to the labels as much. Their value doesn't fluctuate. But I also don't want them to be fucking blindsided when they step into society. So how have you found that balance to be, and what was that process like early on? Was it difficult to sort of embody that, or when did you even realize that the importance of maintaining some awareness of the society that your daughter was being born into?
That's a really good question. I wanted to add quickly to anybody who's wondering, we're never ready, just so you know. We're never ready to have kids whatsoever. There's no such thing as being ready. Just know that, okay? If you're like, I don't know if I'm ready, you never will be. You never will be. Just get that out of your head. Nobody is. That's not what determines how successful you'll be. Okay. Back to the question though. Again, awareness. I'm aware of the world that I live in. I'm aware of the reality of connection versus the current perception of division. And so while I will always embody the mentality that I am experiencing, I'm never going to try and make that the mentality that my daughter is solely experiencing. I always want her to get out into the world, meet people, meet friends, go through unexpected situations, have challenges, be judged, go through the process of judging others to try and self-validate. So a lot of that is just letting her exist, but it's being there for her when that crescendo finally comes, when you can feel like it's the last straw that's going to break the camel's back. Right there, when you're there and they know they can turn to you, that's all you need. That's all you need to do. But it's knowing that they can turn to you, which means knowing that you don't have any expectations of them, that you're not trying to say, you must be this. And I find that's a really big part of that, because just as with myself, the recognition that I am whole changes everything that I do. It makes me far more able to tackle any challenge and go into any situation. But it took me a long time to recognize I didn't need to be anything else. That, to me, is the only thing that I'm trying to communicate to my daughter. True, I want her to have the opportunity to express that recognition as she gets older, which is why you guide her towards things like violin lessons, getting her high school diploma, things that will be useful to her on her journey. But at no point have I ever implied to my daughter that somehow she will be less for not doing those things. Even in terms of her high school diploma, I've told her it just helps you get a job. It doesn't make you more intelligent. There are lots of people out there who have become very wealthy without ever passing high school. This is just something that becomes a tool for you. Treat it that way. Don't treat it like getting this thing is going to make you smarter. That's not what this is. It's just indicative that you have memorized certain things so someone can hire you. That's all it is. And it's a very different perspective than, well, you got to be successful, got to get respect, got to get out there and forge your way, all that. I just want her to be herself. And knowing how capable I am when I am myself, I have complete faith in my daughter. I don't need to know what she's going to do. I know that she's going to do the best she can from a place where she's at least fulfilled and whole in herself. That's the hope, at least. And true, you have no control over that. But the more you embody it, the easier it is for them to see, because you're there when the other mentality breaks them and you haven't been broken. And in that is exactly the lesson we want to teach them about life.
I think this points to a really important recognition for any relationship that you're in, any situation that you're in, really, whether it's parenting or, with friends or another relationship, is you can't do it for them. You can't recognize things for them. You can't experience peace for them. You can't let go of shit for them. All you can do is be someone who is capable of doing these things, be an example of these things, foster an environment for them that may allow them to experience it for themselves. As much as I love my parents and appreciate them very much and everything that they've done for me, like everything that we talk about on here didn't come from them. They didn't, teach me any of this stuff. It's all things that I've experienced in my own life. Now, given the environment I came from growing up, whether that fostered, waking up or not is tough to say, because, Ray came from the opposite end of the spectrum and he woke up, and there's a lot of people who come from my end of the spectrum who don't. Some may argue that it can be equally as difficult to quote unquote wake up from the side of comfort versus the side of extreme discomfort. So it's not really that allows you to wake up, but the extent of what you can do, I think, as a parent, and again, coming at it from the child's perspective, coming at it from just relationships in general perspective, is understanding the limitations of what you can do for other people and being okay with that, like coming to terms with that, recognizing that you can't force someone to do anything, recognize things more deeply, let go of their shit. You can't force them into an easier environment to grow up in, even, and even letting go of the idea that you could ever possibly know what the best environment for them to grow up in is. Like, it comes down to just being free in yourself, expressing that freedom, not curating anything necessarily, not forcing them into any types of recognitions that you think is going to make their life easier. You can't do it for them. And I think that's a powerful thing to recognize, whether you're a parent with a child, whether you're a child talking to your parents. You can't do it for them. It comes from both ends, whether you're interacting with your friends or siblings or partner or spouse or whatever it may be. You can't do it for them. The best you can do is be free in yourself, be an example of what that's like, be willing to question your own assumptions, the labels that you've clung to for a very long time, and just be there with them, walk through it with them, experience reality with them. And I think being there, expressing that empathy, being able to see yourself in them, see yourself in their shoes is the best you can do with any relationship.
Absolutely. Be on their side. That doesn't mean always agree with them. That doesn't mean do what they want. It means be on their side, not on your side. There's a very big distinction there. And I want to bring this up because I know it's assaulting to a lot of parents' mentalities. We get into this habit where we think the system is the way to go. I grew up in the system. They have to go through the system. That's what's going to teach them how to live in the world because they need a job, right? They got to go to university. They need to pay rent. They need to live in a city, get a car, do all that stuff. And so we have this idea in our head, and we're like, the system's going to teach them how to do that. And then they go into the system, they go into schooling, and they start to do things like skip class, or they start to do things like fail their tests, or they start to do things like pretend they're sick. And what we do is we take the side of the institution that we have entrusted to teach them. Don't do that. Don't take the side of a cold, detached institution that is run like a business over your child. The fact is that diploma is not that fucking important. And this is how I know. Because you can fail high school and then go and get an equivalency in a year to a year and a half in college. It's not that difficult. It is not that important that they finish this by a certain fucking age. Regardless of everybody else saying, oh, what are they going to do with that skip year? You know what? Maybe they'll get a job. Maybe they'll do better in college than they ever did in high school. And they'll actually love learning enough that they go on to get their PhD because they haven't been just doing the fucking grind. We don't know what's best for them. We don't know what the path that's going to be the most fulfilling for them looks like because we're too busy with ours. But we know our path is more fulfilling when people leave us the fuck alone and let us figure that out and be there for us while we do, rather than trying to steer us in a direction that validates them. Don't be that person. You never wanted that person. Why would you do that to yourself? And if you're doing it to yourself, you know why. Because you're still identifying. You're still looking for a sense of value. You're still defining yourself, and it is dividing you from your child.
And no matter how much you may want to, you cannot steer anyone your whole life. You can't steer them their whole life. Comes a point where they are on their own. They are fully their own person. And if you get to that point trying to steer anyone, and then the shift happens rather abruptly, and they have been relying upon that steering, or you have been relying upon that steering, it's going to be a shock to the system, to say the least. And a lot of it comes from your desire to derive your sense of value from them. And so, as much as you rely upon them for that, they rely upon you. And then they don't know what it's like to be on their own once they get to a certain age, whether it be 18, whether it be 13, whether it be 22, whatever age that comes to. And so, not clinging so tightly, not thinking that, you got to be that helicopter parent and make sure they're getting up, they got their first job and when they're a teenager and they don't wake up on time, and it's like, let them sleep in, let them figure that out, let them experience that hardship on their own, or else you keep waking them up, they're going to be 25 and they're still going to be relying upon you. And so weaning off of that desire for control of them because, you think you know what's best for them and you need to if they're not going to do it, someone's got to do it for them. That's going to end. That always ends at some point. And if they don't know what it's like to go through that on their own, to experience some of those hardships in their 20s and 30s are going to hurt a hell of a lot more than experiencing those hardships in their teenage years. So I think letting go of the desire for control, of the idea that you can steer them through their entire life, is another one of the best things that you can let go of as a parent as early as possible.
Well said. Absolutely. We're going to wrap this up here, I think. But I want to mention quickly that while this episode has been a lot of fun, you'll notice that underlying this episode are all the same messages that we've always been saying. And it's because being a good parent has nothing to do with being a good parent. It has to do with you being free, free enough to be sensitive and aware, to actually see what it is you're involved with in terms of your child in this world and your continuing existence as reality itself. All of that changes what you do as a parent. So the same journey that you're on to being yourself is the same journey to being the parent you want to be. Just be yourself. Recognize your child as yourself and be there. Commit to that. That's all any of us could ever ask of any parent. Just think of it that way. On that note, I think we're going to wrap up here. This has been a lot of fun. I just want to mention again, we're actually not here. We're at our retreat in Port Alberni on Vancouver Island, Canada. This is our second retreat. I'm sure that at this point we are having a great time, fully immersed in some deep conversations. I wish that you could be here, but since you can't, you can join us at the next retreat in the Netherlands on November 11th to November 19th. Tickets are available on the website, dualisticunity.com. Get them now because they're going to go fast.
Looking forward to seeing you there.
Bye, everyone.